On October 14, 2004, on a repositioning flight, a plane with two pilots ran into trouble right over the American skies, and a tragic accident occurred. The cause behind the accident was many ridiculous and unexpected mistakes. On October 14, 2004, at the airport in Little Rock, Arkansas, USA, currently known as Bill and Hillary Clinton National Airport, a Bombardier CRJ 200 aircraft belonging to Pinnacle Airlines carrying passengers was about to take off for Minneapolis. But a few moments later, the captain on board found an engine-related problem. As a result, the captain and crew decided to cancel the takeoff and asked ATC for permission to return to the aircraft parking lot. It was then approved, and the plane returned to the parking area at Little Rock Airport, where passengers were transferred to another plane. The CRJ 200 schedule for that day was canceled. A team of engineers was assigned to fix the problem, and by that evening, all repairs were completed. Upon inspection of the aircraft, the engineers reported that only a few sensors on the aircraft were damaged, and the engineers replaced all of them. Finally, the CRJ 200 aircraft was confirmed to be in good condition and eligible to resume flight. As the aircraft was supposed to be at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport for the next morning's flight, two pilots were assigned to fly the CRJ 200 to Minneapolis for an estimated 1 hour and 30 minutes. The pilot of this passengerless flight was 31-year-old Jesse Rhodes. At the time, he had 6,900 total flight hours, of which 973 hours were on the CRJ 200. Captain is also known to operate luxury aircraft such as Gulfstream, one of the most expensive aircraft brands in the world. He is known to be a funny pilot and easy to make friends with. Accompanying the captain was a first officer named Peter Kazars. 23 years old, he was very young and had only 761 total flying hours, with 222 hours in CRJ 200 aircraft. It so happened that First Officer Peter had also previously worked for Gulfstream, and he worked alongside the captain, hence the close relationship between the two pilots. Meanwhile, the Bombardier CRJ 200 aircraft, with registration number N8396A, was leased by Pinnacle Airlines from Northwest Airlines, and it is known that the plane was manufactured in 2000, was 4 years old at the time of the accident, and had accumulated 10,168 total flight hours. At 9:21 p.m. local time, the pilot reported to ATC that they were ready to take off from runway 24. Pinnacle Airlines 3701 followed ATC's instructions, and the aircraft began to taxi on the runway and take off into the night sky. After leaving Little Rock, the plane continued to climb to its designated cruising altitude, but apparently the repositioning flight bored the captain. About 10 minutes after the plane took off, the captain suddenly expressed a very bold idea. He wanted to operate the aircraft in a way that he thought was more interesting. Apparently, at that time, the idea of the captain was approved by the first officer. Then, the captain immediately took action. First, the captain made the plane rise sharply at a speed of more than 3,000 feet per minute. The pressure in the cabin immediately increased to 26 times the normal state. Seeing this, the two pilots laughed and felt satisfied. They really enjoyed the situation. After stabilizing the aircraft, they began to climb again to the planned cruising altitude of 33,000 feet. About 5 minutes later, the first officer asked the captain to switch seats. At that time, the first officer wanted to try to control the aircraft. He wanted to sit in the captain's chair. Both pilots did some wild things after changing seats. Both continued to joke around and were ready for the second act. At that point, the autopilot was turned off, and the first officer did what the captain had done earlier. He started pulling the nose of the plane very sharply upwards with great excitement. During this second maneuver, the plane rose at a speed of almost 4,500 feet per minute. Not only that, they also deliberately allowed the aircraft's speed to continue to drop until it approached a stall condition, at which point both pilots continued to enjoy the situation. It was an unimaginable situation. They were playing games in the air and kept thinking about what to do next with the airplane. So the two of them got back into the action by shaking the plane. The plane shook violently. They both enjoyed the game, and they even thought about the name of the action they did. The two agreed to name their action and game with the Crazy Shaking Game, a name that suits them perfectly. But as it turned out, their game wasn't over yet. After the two pilots got bored of playing the same game repeatedly, they came up with a new, bolder idea. It is known that the CRJ-200 has the maximum flying capability at 41,000 feet, and the two pilots wanted to reach the maximum altitude. The captain invited his first officer to try to climb to 41,000 feet, and the equally crazy first officer agreed. The captain immediately asked ATC for permission. At 9:35 p.m. local time, the captain contacted the air traffic controller to request a change in flight altitude. ATC also asked what the problem was, so that the plane wanted to climb to 41,000 feet. At that time, the captain only replied that they had no passengers, so they decided to try to climb to 41,000 feet. Then permission was given by ATC at 9:36 p.m. local time. ATC granted clearance and the aircraft climbed to its new cruising altitude. Both pilots immediately reactivated their autopilots, setting the autopilot to vertical speed mode. This vertical speed mode is a feature in the airplane's autopilot system that allows the pilot to set and maintain a certain rate of climb or descent. This was a reckless move by the pilots, as although the upper limit is 41,000 feet, the airline itself restricts flights below 40,000 feet to ensure flight safety. A captain with enough flying hours should have understood that the air density is low at an altitude that is too high, which can cause a lack of air in the engine combustion chamber. If there is not enough air, it will kill the combustion chamber, causing the CRJ-200's engine to shut down. In addition, the CRJ-200 autopilot system works similarly to other aircraft models, but in this case, the selection of vertical speed mode to climb to 41,000 feet was not appropriate. Vertical speed mode is rarely used at 41,000 feet on CRJ aircraft because, in this mode, the system only focuses on maintaining the specified altitude without considering speed. So if the aircraft speed drops to a dangerous level, the aircraft will still prioritize or maintain its altitude. Because they were so excited about the stunt that the two pilots did, they completely ignored the flight parameters. They were too engrossed in chatting and laughing. The captain didn't realize that the aircraft's speed was dropping, while the pilot's focus at the time was to keep flying up to 41,000 feet. However, at that altitude, with the speed getting lower, the nose of the plane started to lift higher, which reduced the air intake into the engines. Not to mention the air is very thin at that altitude. Only at that point, when the aircraft reached an altitude of 41,000 feet, they realized that the nose was very high and the speed was very low. In addition, the aircraft's electrical system showed signs of failure then. The captain began to realize that something had happened, and suddenly the aircraft screen displayed a warning that both engines had shut down due to insufficient air for the combustion chamber. The aircraft immediately lost thrust and continued to lose speed until it was in a near stall. The captain retook control at 9:54 p.m., and the worst thing they had feared happened. The plane stalled and began to fall. To restart the stopped engine, the two pilots frantically activated the auxiliary power unit and fought for control of the aircraft. After some time, they finally regained control of the flight at an altitude of between 35,000 feet and 38,000 feet. However, the aircraft's engines remained unresponsive, which also meant there was no oxygen in the cabin, forcing both pilots to use oxygen masks. The situation on board Flight 3701 became increasingly tense. The first officer repeatedly tried to start the engine, but the engine still did not start, and the tension continued to rise. Based on the flight manual provided by the aircraft manufacturer, the captain knew that they needed to maintain a minimum speed of 240 knots to get enough airflow through the engine to help restart the engine. But the problem was that they could not achieve that speed, so the plane came to a rapid stop, and the engine still could not start, as if something was jammed in the plane's engine. In such a serious emergency, the captain and first officer still had not made a mayday call to ATC. At 22:09, after several unsuccessful attempts to restart the engine, the captain finally decided to contact ATC and request assistance with a report of an engine failure. The captain requested a vector to the nearest airport. There were 6 alternative airports at that time. ATC then directed the aircraft to the nearest airport, Jefferson City Airport. The captain then responded by saying he would restart the engine. The captain at that time lied about the situation on the CRJ 200 flight because he told ATC that one of the aircraft engines was dead, even though both aircraft engines were dead at that time. The captain realized that they did not have enough ability to reach the nearest airport. So at that point, they tried to find an emergency landing site. As the plane's altitude got lower and lower, they kept trying to restart the engine, but all efforts were in vain. The silence between them was eerie and tense. Both pilots realized they were facing a critical situation. As the plane continued to descend even further, the pilots saw the highway ahead of them. At 22:14 local time, the captain reported to ATC that they would not reach the airport and would land on the highway. ATC asked for confirmation of the aircraft's position, but ATC did not get any response from the two pilots. ATC kept repeating the question, but only received silence from the CRJ 200 aircraft. As the pilots struggled, they thought of the right way to make an emergency landing to minimize the damage. The two pilots decided not to lower the landing gear, because if the landing gear was dropped, the plane would hit many nearby houses and vehicles. As they continued to approach the highway, the captain saw too many vehicles on the road, so he decided to abort the landing on the highway, and the plane landed in the area around the road, hitting trees and an old barn, after which the plane exploded violently. The plane crashed at 10:15 p.m. local time in a field outside Jefferson City. Both pilots died. Fortunately, there were no fatalities on the ground. After the incident, the National Transportation Safety Board conducted an investigation into the accident, and the investigators were shocked when they overheard conversations in the cockpit and heard how the two pilots fiddled with the plane during the flight. Even the CEO of Pinnacle Airlines was shocked at the lack of professionalism shown by the two pilots. He also said that both pilots had poor flying skills and resource management and failed to immediately recognize the offense committed. The investigation found that the chain of events began when the pilots performed several non-standard maneuvers at 15,000 feet, triggering a stall warning. They set the autopilot to climb to 41,000 feet at 500 feet per minute, exceeding the manufacturer's recommended climb speed. In summary, the cause of the accident was the pilot's unprofessional behavior that deviated from operating standards. Poor aircraft handling procedures and skills, as well as the pilot's failure to immediately prepare for an emergency landing, including the pilot's dishonesty in communicating with air traffic controllers and the pilot's poor checklist checking, were contributing factors to the tragedy. These points are contained in the NTSB's final report on the crash of Flight 3701. Thomas Palmer, former Pinnacle Airlines training program manager, said about the accident mentioned it was unbelievable that a professional flight crew would act like that. After the accident, the airline restricted CRJ 200 flights to a maximum altitude of 37,000 feet. The airline also changed its training program, including simulator training in high-altitude operations. 1 year after the crash, every Pinnacle Airlines pilot was given simulator training up to 41,000 feet and shown what happened on Flight 3701. This is the shocking and true story of one of the flights of Pinnacle Airlines, an airline that was founded in 1985 under the name Express Airlines and underwent restructuring until it changed its name to Endeavor Air in 2013.